Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Crypto Hipsters Curtain Calls. This is your host, Jamil Hassan, the Crypto Hipster, where I bring you compilations of my previous seasons' podcasts in clips into a compilation. And this is episode 41, entitled Don't Come Around Here No More, while leveraging blockchain technology to make a difference for humanity continues to and always will matter the most. This compilation is a combination of 5 podcasts, one from season 6, 3 from season 7, and 1 from season 8. The first conversation was a clip from my very first podcast of season 6. I later spoke to this man in season 8, towards the end of season 8. It's a wonderful conversation I had with Oleg Fomenko, who's the co-founder of Sweatcoin and the CEO of the Sweat economy. That conversation was the end of August 2023, and we talked about helping the world become more physically active by introducing Web3 participants to the Sweat economy. That was a great conversation. Main thrust is on social impact, health impact, and please check that out. All of my podcasts, by the way, are available on Spotify, Apple, Anchor, YouTube, anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts. You can check them out. My second podcast, my second clip, and the fourth one also, with the second one, is from Consensus. I had a dozen or so, 10, 12, can't remember, interviews with people on the ground during Consensus 2024. And I called this particular this series of episodes, Crypto Hipster Presents Reporter on the Ground. This episode 7 is with John Wingate, who's the CEO of Bank Social. That was the beginning of June 2024 during season 7. John and I spoke about how to create collaborative innovation through social capitalism. The next conversation is third discussion is with Terence Kwok, the CEO of Humanity Protocol. That was in July 2024, season 7. We talked about charting new paths for humanity to preserve the potential of people amidst an ever-increasing artificial intelligence revolution. Next was my first of 2 eventual conversations with John Vibes. John Vibes at Consensus. There's a reporter on the ground, episode number 9. He's a chief vibe officer at Somnia. I like the title. We talked about creating a new unified experiential society. Last but not least, it's my third conversation over my podcast years with Cyrus Taghehchian, who's the co-founder of Aces.Fun. This video conversation was not on ShopX, which is my first 2 conversations with him, but this new venture, Aces.Fun. In February 2025, season 8, we talked about how they help retail consumers thrive by transforming Web3 ecosystems to adopting an inclusive economic model instead of a player versus player trap. Make sure you check that one out. Like I said, all these conversations are available in their entirety on my podcast channel. Please check them out if you're interested in any one of these clips. They're wonderful conversations. And this episode is episode 41, entitled Don't Come Around Here No More, while leveraging blockchain technology to make a difference for humanity continues to and always will matter most. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time on my next episode of the Crypto Hipsters Curtain Calls. Have a great day. Enjoy.
Yeah, more than 90% of our users are brand new to Web3. We're first ever crypto asset that they have. And yeah, I think that this is exactly kind of our specialty, to bring in people that are keen and interested, but felt that it was too complicated, too difficult, and too incomprehensible for them to engage.
Excellent. So let's talk about comprehensibility then. You know, from a world perspective. You know, and I want to talk about a little bit about the World Health Organization. They've listed, you know, over the years, they listed 6 core components to health systems, and I want to see how you fit into that. You know, and let me see if I can bring them up. Okay, those 6 are leadership and governance, service delivery, health system financing, health workforce, medical products, vaccines and technologies, and health information systems. Where do you fit into those? And how can people start to think in our daily lives in terms of what those core components are for health systems, so people can improve the health in their lives and be a beneficial part of your economy?
Brilliant question, and very sophisticated one. Is it okay if I give it, you know, kind of few seconds thought?
Sure.
The sort of simple answer is we are across all of these 6 areas. If you start thinking about these 6 areas, you see verticals which go from treatment, which is what World Health Organization is focusing on, all the way to prevention and prophylaxis. And each of these 6 would be relevant in both medical treatment on dealing with a, you know, kind of medical condition, as well as prevention and prophylaxis. Where we sit is in that area of prevention and prophylaxis, because one of the best ways of not ending up in hospital, not ending up on the surgery table, is to be physically active. And a lot of healthcare organizations around the world are recognizing this. So, for example, we do have a very large scale contract with a national health service in the UK. And what is that contract about? It's not about treating people, but it is about preventing people becoming diabetic. So diabetes 2 is typically coming in 2 phases. One is a pre-diabetic syndrome. So you are, not you, but one is identified as a diabetes risk. And effectively, you're given about 6 months to change your diet, and more importantly, change your lifestyle. It is a lot easier to change one's diet than to change lifestyle. And where we come in is we're helping people to put more physical activity into their everyday life, so that within that 6 months, they change, or they bring enough change into their life to not become diabetic. That saves hundreds of thousands of pounds per person over their lifetime. And of course, it prevents them from becoming diabetic. That is an incredible improvement over their quality of life through the whole duration of their life, and they live longer. So this is just to give you an illustration. So it's across all 6, but it is firmly on prevention and prophylaxis, where I think all of us are starting to, you know, kind of focus a lot more. All of us are trying to think, how do I prevent from ending up there, as opposed to, okay, if that happens, where do I go? So yeah, it's a bit more sort of forward thinking.
You spoke last night about creating, you know, the freedom to transact.
Exactly.
Creating a fair financial system, and this role of social capitalism.
Well, that's so I coined that word back. I'm not sure if I was the first one, but I've been using that word for 5, 6 years now. Social capitalism. Social capitalism is to me, it's the concept of individuals, right? I think capitalism is great, first off. I'm not anti-capitalist. I believe I should be able to work, deploy capital, and create more capital, and create more opportunities. I'm more of a social capitalist, though, in that I believe that I should do that directly with you. It's funny that up until a couple years ago, you and I, the only way for us to pay each other was through an intermediary that was somewhere, like we're right here, and we've got to pay 3.5% to transact with each other. That to me is just ludicrous. It's just crazy, right? It's ludicrous, especially with all the data flying around on the internet. And so to Robert's point about freedom to transact, this is why I'm not a fan of just Bitcoin. Like I've talked with people, and to me, we're going back to the days of almost barter. I did something, I made something, you believe in what I did, you believe in what I made. Why shouldn't we be able to have the freedom to transact in what I made?
We should.
We should. And so when we talk about social capitalism, the idea is that you and I should be able to create a capitalistic economy, a microeconomy that serves just you and I. If nobody else wants to use it, don't use it, right? And if those 10 people want to come use it, let them come use it. And it should be interoperable with what those 10 people want to use, right? So we're moving, it's like, think like social media, right? Everybody's coming together, they build groups, they build commonalities. That's what social capitalism is all about. It's about control, and I don't think there's any better way to do it than through the ownership. As financial rails underpin everything we do every day. If you don't have a financial rail, you can't do anything any day. And so owning the last mile of the financial ecosystem is critically important if you want to reduce. To move money across the Fed is pennies. It's pennies. And companies are charging dollars to do it. Why?
Profit.
Well, I would argue two things. That's one thing. Yes, of course they want to make profit. I want to make profit too. You want to make profit too. Like we all want to make profit. But there are systems that cost more. There are systems that cost less, right? Like we use Hedera. To send something on Hedera is 0.0001 cent. Right? It's got 32 Fortune 500 companies maintaining nodes. Some people don't call that decentralized. I call that decentralized. They're going to have a fuck ton harder time colluding as 32 Fortune 500 companies than the unknown amount of validators, or who the validators are on pick another chain, right? Right? Those guys, if they collude, it's all public. Good luck. That's a fraud shot through the heart. So the idea of social capitalism, that we can come together, that we have freedom of money, that we have the ability to own our financial institution, it already exists, right? Credit unions can create securities. Credit unions can create financial instruments. Credit unions can make loans, and not through some chain of intermediaries, directly. And this is why. So again, having the ability, I really want to stress that, the ability to own the rail, whether it's a crypto rail, right? Because that's what, when you have Bitcoin in your pocket, you own the ability to transact directly on the rail. There's no fucking intermediary. That's where all of our systems need to get. And the best chance we have at connecting and bridging TradeFi to DeFi, which we're going to need for a while, is in member-owned banking. It is in financial cooperatives. And the beautiful thing about it, I'll come back to the beginning, this structure is available everywhere.
You're fully decentralized, so this means that, and I'm certain that there's use cases other than just, advertising, especially when you're in, Africa and different areas of the world that are less, that have less opportunities than others. So what are the key areas that you foresee adoption of your protocol, and why do you see it being effective in all these areas?
I think if we look at different sort of markets, right? Like if we just even look at the Web3 one, I mentioned advertising because that's the closest in terms of the Web2 world. If we think about Web3 world, it's on-chain games, it's deep in. How do you ensure that people who are operating these networks, you don't have one person running a very disproportionate percentage of the infrastructure, right? If you look at airdrops, every single project's coming out with airdrops to incentivize your early users. How do we ensure that, you know, you don't have industrial farmers creating hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands of accounts to sort of milk these rewards in a way that is not beneficial to anybody? We look at and then we ultimately also look at, you know, developing countries. How do we, you know, there's obviously the whole concept of universal basic income, right? Where, you know, how do we actually distribute more to people on sort of a one person, one share sort of way, right? And that's also something that we were actively sort of working on. But ultimately, we don't even think it should be sort of universal basic income. It's, you know, universal basic equity, right? How do we look at, you know, different sort of projects, different sort of companies that actually want to distribute, whether it's equity, whether it's tokens, whether it's value, right, to many people. And we see ourselves as sort of being the portal to do that. So, you know, we anticipate a lot of different use cases, and it's really not just, you know, this one thing, because, you know, we do believe that the problem we're trying to solve is a pretty big problem down the road.
I don't think I've heard it put that way. Universal basic equity. It's an interesting concept. What would the world look like if we had that?
The world would look like where, you know, we would, the whole idea is like universal basic income is some sort of centralized entity saying, okay, you know what, because you're a human being, we're going to give you some income, right? But when we look at sort of universal basic equity, it's actually many different parties providing value to individuals for whatever reason it is, right? You know, it might be some sort of government entity that wants to give them, you know, basic income. It might be different sort of projects, different sort of companies, different sort of entities that have some sort of reason and incentive to also be providing value to various individuals for something that they do, for who they are, whatever it is. And what is underpinning that is that, you know, this needs to be a human being, not necessarily who it is, but we just need to know that it's a human being, so that there's no cheating, there's no fraud, right? And then if we actually even think about in closer to the Web3 space, historically, if we think about blockchain networks, one of the key utilities for a lot of tokens is governance, right? We hear about governance tokens a lot. We hear about DAOs a lot, right? And a lot of these entities historically, it's not very democratic. It seems democratic because technically anybody can participate. It doesn't really matter where you're from. You have a blockchain address. You can participate in a DAO. You can participate in governance. But the challenge to that historically also is that every single one of these, generally, it's based on sort of a proof of stake model, right? It's how many tokens you have determines how many votes you have, right? And it sort of makes sense because it can't be how many wallet addresses you have determines how many votes you have, because you can just generate unlimited number of wallet addresses, right? And so it actually becomes a situation where voting and governance has historically been based on how rich you are, okay? So the more you have, the more influence you have. And what we are able to do by creating this sort of infrastructure is actually start allowing companies and projects to be able to sort of get to a one person, one vote sort of system.
I like the comparison of dystopian versus utopian, right?
Yeah.
And a couple of years ago, when I was interviewing metaverse founders, the buzz at the time was Facebook's creating a metaverse. how do you see Facebook's metaverse being dystopian, and what lessons have you learned from them to help create utopia?
Well, that's a very interesting topic there. Well, Facebook, I mean, the corporation that they are, the impact that they've had, the way that they've handled the businesses that they operate, it has not been great, to say the least. And I don't think that their handling of the metaverse situation was very responsible, because they rushed into a very new and nascent space that was just getting started, and that wasn't ready for prime time. And they cast this massive spotlight on something that wasn't ready, and it was something that they couldn't even get ready. I mean, our technology is way better than what they put out. That was kind of embarrassing for them. So that, I think, was a big problem with the metaverse narrative, honestly, because it went in this direction where everybody was like, oh, well, this isn't cool, and it's like, yeah, that's because it's not ready yet. And this guy just kind of jumped the gun. And now I think we're getting to the point where the kind of experiences that people expected from the metaverse are actually, the capabilities are here to bring it into fruition now. And that's kind of what we're trying to accelerate.
We're doing it now without the buzz.
Huh?
We're doing it now without the buzz.
Exactly.
So it gives you opportunity to, because there's no buzz, it gives you the opportunity to
do it right.
Yeah. I remember a couple Super Bowls ago, there was like, I counted them, like I was at this party, no one was paying attention. There's like 13, I think it was a Bengals Super Bowl game, they lost to the Rams. There's like 13 Super Bowl metaverse commercials.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, and you don't see them anymore. So, is it a long tail where people got bored and went away, or is it a project just takes time and care and to do it right? Like,
that's what I think. And I also think hype cycles play a big thing into that, because right now the big thing is AI. That's what everybody's talking about. And I'm sure AI is going to be really big, but I'm also sure that next year or the year after, something's going to take the stage away. There's going to be another big thing. AI is still going to be playing a big role, just like the same thing has happened with crypto and NFTs and all of these technologies. They each get their moment in their 15 minutes of fame to some extent, and then they got to get back to work to get another one. That's kind of how I look at this.
Meme coins.
Yep.
but meme coins have an interesting perspective. Like, okay, people say they don't have any value, but you could say, content creators create things that might have limited value, but you help content creators, right? So how can content creators define every element of the metaverse life cycle and help them?
Awesome. Yeah, that's a very good question. And I will say, on the meme coin comment, I think meme coins put a value on culture, and I think that that's a very valuable thing.
Yeah, so you mentioned the buyer's journey and the benefits of AI. I think that's great. I did want to ask you about, you said the buyer's journey. What's the one thing that I saw you write about was called the prisoner's dilemma, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of people feel that AI, they're now become a prisoner to AI, right? But what is actually the prisoner's dilemma, and how do you get the prisoner out of the dilemma?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So this goes back to my economics days in college, in the university, in a class called game theory, right? So game theory is basically, if you're in a certain situation, what will you do and what will other people do? And then there's different types of games or situations that could arise that you could predict what people are going to do based on the incentives or information at hand. And the prisoner's dilemma, and the reason why it's called the prisoner's dilemma, let's just kind of use the same example that it's textbook. Let's say you have two people that are captured by the cops. They're prisoners now. They're put into two different rooms. They were captured at two different times. Now the cops are telling them, "Hey, just turn the other guy in, and we'll give you a lighter sentence, and the other person's going to get a heavier sentence." But if they both say nothing, then they're both going to get a very light sentence or walk away free, because then the cops don't have anything. So it creates this dilemma. It's like, well, do I say something or not? Because I can't communicate with my with the other party, right? Because we're in two separate rooms. We don't know what they're going to do. And in that moment, if I don't say anything and the other person doesn't say anything, then we both walk free. That's what I want. But I can't be so sure if the other person's not going to say anything. So then at that point, I'm just like, okay, maybe I should confess. So then I get a little bit of a medium sentence, but then the other person's going to get a higher sentence, but at least I get away with a lighter sentence. And this is the dilemma. And what happens is, like, it's always best in the situations in a prisoner's dilemma just to stay quiet, and have the other person stay quiet. Unfortunately, there's an incentive to speak, and you get scared and all that kind of stuff, where you just don't want to like be the other person confessing, and then you're the one that goes to jail and they only get like a year and you get 10 years, right? So that's kind of the outcome of this whole thing. And this is where we are in a lot of our in a lot of crypto, because it is a PvP. What is this other person going to do? What am I going to do? If we both don't sell, that's great, right? Because then things are going to be great. And if I sell first and then they're caught, or if they sell first and we're caught, and it creates this kind of like dynamic. And this is the catalyst in building that inverse relationship and having the ability to have not a prisoner's dilemma in the Aces.Fun trading engine and trading game that we created. It's the game within the game. But more generally speaking, how do you take the prisoner out of this dilemma? I think it's just that we have to change the way we operate. Because like right now we are in a situation where in capitalism, it's rankings, like at me versus you in a lot of ways. And if we move into a different type of game, and I'm not saying we should become socialism, communism, or anything along those lines, that there's terms like conscious capitalism, which is still about like, hey, let's innovate and build cool stuff, but it's not all about maximizing shareholder profit at all costs, including destroying the planet, right? We could create different KPIs for capitalism besides maximizing shareholder value. So in order to take this like prisoner out, like there's always going to be a prisoner's dilemma when you're in a game competing with other people. But if we could create the game where we're going to be working together to accomplish a common goal, then there is no more prisoner's dilemma, because we all have the same goal in mind. We're going to be going in the same direction. And what's good for me is good for you. And what's good for you is good for me. And there is no more prisoner. You're not a prisoner anymore in that sense.